Well, good evening, everyone. It's Carpo here. I've stepped outside onto my back porch to make this video because while it's maybe a little calmer and quieter inside and I can sit and face the camera, I just like to come out here and sit down sometimes and make a video where I have absolutely no obligation to look at anything, such as the camera. And when I look around, I can be more inspired by my environment. And I actually had this video planned. I was going to read a couple pages from a book I have. This book is called Pharmacognosis, and it's from Dale Pendle. There's also Pharmacopoeia and now I can't remember which one. Stimula, I can't remember. Anyway, there's 3 books in this set, which are basically about plant compounds and drugs and allies and friends and enemies in the plant world. Mostly plant medicines and what you might call poisons in some regards. Well, as I was reading the book, I was reading a particular page about dissociatives and ketamine, and then on the very next page was this poem, or rather a writing, I would call it. And then the following page, there's a dialogue between a philosopher and a person. You could give him any name. And it speaks about philosopher kings and how there are always a ruling class, and there will always be servants, and there will always be leaders. There will always be militants. And the main 3 classes, the average working man, the militant, and the, well, you might call them elite philosopher kings, or merely, in today's world, just the fools. Now, the only one line in particular that sticks out that I wanted to read was down at the bottom of the first page, and it says, "When saying certain things, it is best to wear a coxcomb." And a coxcomb is a jester's hat. And what that line represents is that, well, when you try to talk about certain serious things, you're better off to look like an idiot or act like an idiot. Because if you act too seriously, people take you too seriously. When people take you too seriously, they take notice of you. And when certain people take notice of you, you're likely to be confronted with problems. Now, the particular subject that I'm speaking about is those who rise up against tyrannical governments, those who rise up against tyranny in general, and those who open their mouths when they see things that are wrong. And the term of the wearing the coxcomb is, in a way, to say, if you don't look like a fool when you're screaming conspiracy, then you will be taken seriously. And that's not always a good thing. One of the points that was made in the pages I was reading was that any labor group or organized movement to try to change the status quo, anyone who rises up and tries to regain power for the people is quickly put down and oppressed. And this makes it very difficult for the average person to step up to the plate and make a difference, make an impact, if they feel that their time is wasted because it won't be recognized. When someone screams wolf, and there's really a wolf, we become so accustomed to it that it's just the way of life. We walk among wolves. How do we get ourselves out of the slave class that we have found ourselves in? Do we rise up and become philosopher kings? Or do we try to, if you can't beat them, join them, so to speak? Of course not. No one wants to join someone for the sake of just having power. But then again, not everyone in power has power just to have power. The way I see it, power is an obligation, and it's a burden. Having money or power is a burden on the individual who bears it. But money and power aren't necessarily as entwined as people think. Having money doesn't necessarily mean you're a mover. It doesn't mean you really make decisions that affect the world, although many people who have money do make those decisions because they have the money to back up the choices they want to make. But you can't convince the world to put on a jester hat. Every generation that grows up and moves forward and tries to do something better always looks upon the past generation as the fool and the next generation as the child, and always thinks that they have exactly what it takes to make the difference. Well, I dare not admit defeat, but I definitely don't think my generation to be the bee's knees of change. But we're on the precipice. I feel like we're almost at the pinnacle of what we might consider modern society. That the only way we can go from here is to find ourselves in enough agreeance to where we're not fighting amongst ourselves anymore. Those who have something to say will definitely say it. Unfortunately, there will be many people who will say things that have no real bearing on reality. Things that are based in delusion, whether it be delusions of grandeur or delusions of lack of power, because often people speak about how a person needs to be empowered and needs to realize that they have the kind of power to make change. Yet at the same time, some people need to take it down a notch and realize that the only way you're going to make an impact is if you have something important to say that enough people can understand in a way that people can understand. I think perhaps one of the most complicated things that's happened through history has been the realization certain people have had about life, and then they try to convey that message to others, and it falls on deaf ears. Not because the other person's not willing to listen, but because they're not willing to understand. There are some things that I read and heard and learned when I was 18 that I never would have understood until I read them again when I was 28. And then again when I was 38. And being 40 years old doesn't put me any closer to being wise. It just puts me into another decade of growth and understanding. I think a lot of folks want to think that, well, we as humans want to think a lot of things. Don't we? I guess I'm just one of them. My friend and I discussed earlier, is there any particular thing we're seeking? And I would have to say no, not in my case. There's no particular piece of knowledge or information that I'm seeking. All I'm seeking is wisdom because it helps me to live better and happier. And ultimately, the goal is happiness for you and those around you. That's the way I see it. Have a great evening.